The attic smelled like dust and 40 years of silence. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just clearing out Mom's house 3 weeks after the funeral, when my hand brushed against an old metal box behind the Christmas decorations. Inside were 11 letters, and by the time I finished reading the last one, I understood that everything my family believed about my Uncle Daniel, the man we'd hated for 30 years, was a lie. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how a box of old letters destroyed one version of my family and gave me a truer one. My mother, Helen, had 2 siblings. Her older sister, Joan, sharp-tongued, controlling, the family's self-appointed moral authority, and her younger brother, Daniel, the one nobody talked about unless it was to say what he'd done. The story I grew up with was simple. Daniel had stolen money from their parents, drained their savings account right before our grandfather got sick, leaving nothing for his care. He disappeared for years afterward, showed up at funerals like a stranger. Aunt Joan made sure every holiday dinner included at least one comment about people who abandon their own blood for money. I was 12 the last time I saw Daniel. He came to my grandmother's funeral, stood at the back, and left before the reception. Joan didn't even let him near the casket. I didn't question any of it. Why would I? Mom never defended him. She just went quiet whenever his name came up, which I mistook for 20 years as shame. Mom died in February. Heart failure, sudden, no long goodbye. Aunt Joan handled most of the funeral arrangements. She always handled everything, and I was left with the house, sorting through 60 years of a life in cardboard boxes. The metal box was tucked behind a stack of ornaments, wrapped in an old pillowcase, like someone had wanted it hidden, not stored. The first letter was dated 31 years ago. It was from Daniel to Mom. Helen, I know you can't say anything. I understand why, but I need you to know I didn't take the money. Joan emptied that account the week before Dad's diagnosis. I have the bank statements. I'm not asking you to choose a side. I'm asking you to keep these safe in case anyone ever needs the truth. My hands were shaking by the second paragraph. I read all 11 letters that night, sitting on the dusty attic floor with a flashlight because I couldn't wait until morning. The second letter had photocopied bank statements attached, withdrawals, large ones, made the week before my grandfather's diagnosis, made from an account only 3 people had access to: my grandfather, Joan, and Daniel. Daniel's letters explained what happened next. Joan had told their parents Daniel took the money. She'd done it calmly, convincingly, the same way she did everything. And because Daniel had no proof at the time beyond his own word, and because Joan was the one already managing their parents' finances and their trust, nobody believed him. In the 4th letter, Daniel wrote, "She told me if I said anything publicly, she'd make sure I never saw Mom and Dad again. She kept that promise even when I stayed silent." By the 8th letter, the tone had changed. Daniel wasn't pleading anymore. He'd given up trying to clear his name. He just wanted someone, anyone, to eventually know. The last letter was dated 4 years ago. "Helen, I don't expect you to fix this. I know what it would cost you with Joan. I just needed it written down somewhere that wasn't only in my head. If you ever decide it's safe to speak, you'll know where to find these. If not, I understand. I always have." My mother had kept proof of her brother's innocence hidden in an attic for over a decade, and she never said a word. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the question that wouldn't leave me alone. Why would Mom protect Joan's lie instead of her own brother? The answer came 3 days later, when I finally called Daniel. A number I found scrawled on the back of the last envelope. 2 area codes and probably 2 phone companies out of date. It still worked. He was quiet for a long time when I told him who I was. Then he said something that changed how I saw my whole childhood. Your mother believed me, Claire. From the very first letter. But Joan had already turned your grandparents against me, and Helen was scared that if she pushed back, Joan would turn them against her too. She had 2 small kids. A mortgage. She told me once, in the only conversation we ever had about it after that she couldn't afford to lose everyone to tell the truth about one person. So she just kept the receipts. Kept them safe. Waited for a day that never came. I thought about my mother going quiet at every Christmas dinner. Not from shame. From 30 years of swallowing a truth that would have cost her everything to speak. I made a decision that night that I now understand was the moment everything shifted from grief into something sharper. I wasn't going to let her silence be the end of the story. I photographed every letter and every bank statement. I had them authenticated by a forensic document examiner. Daniel's original letters, dated and verified, alongside copies of decades-old bank records he'd somehow preserved. I built a file. Methodical. Undeniable. Then I did something Joan never saw coming. I invited the entire family to Mom's house for what I called going through her things together, the kind of gathering Joan always loved to control. Joan arrived early, the way she always did, already directing where furniture should go, what should be donated, what she wanted for herself. I waited until everyone was seated in the living room. Cousins, my own children, Joan's husband, and I put the file on the coffee table. I found something in the attic, I said. Letters from Uncle Daniel. To Mom. Joan's face didn't move, but her hand did. A small, involuntary motion toward her purse, like she was already calculating an exit. I read the first letter aloud, then the bank statements, then Daniel's own words, written when he still believed someone would listen. That's ancient history, Joan said, her voice tight. Daniel always had a way of twisting things to make himself the victim. The bank statements aren't twisted, Joan, I said. They're dated, verified. I had them authenticated this week. The room went silent in a way I'd never heard a family room go silent before. My cousin, Joan's own son, looked at his mother and said quietly, "Is this true?" Joan didn't answer. She stood up, said this was inappropriate for today, and walked out of her own mother's house. Nobody followed her. I called Daniel that evening and put him on speakerphone in the living room. 28 years since most of the people in that room had heard his voice. He cried before he could finish his first sentence. So did half the family in that room. My cousin apologized to him directly for things he'd believed his whole life that were never true. My uncle, Joan's husband, said he'd had his suspicions for years, but had never had the nerve to ask. Joan has not spoken to most of the family since that day. She sent one message to me weeks later. I hope you're proud of yourself for destroying this family over something that happened decades ago. I read it twice. Then I typed 4 words. No, you destroyed it first. Daniel came to visit 2 months later. He stood in the same living room where he'd been excluded from his own mother's funeral reception, and this time, Every single person in that house hugged him. Except Joan. She wasn't there. And even in the photos from family gatherings since, when someone mentions her at all, she never looks him in the eyes. Not even in old pictures we now see differently. He told me later that the hardest part wasn't the 30 years of being blamed. It was watching my mother carry the proof of his innocence in silence for so long, too afraid to use it. But she did use it, in the end. She just used it through me. I think about that box in the attic now, not as evidence of her cowardice, but as an act of quiet faith. She couldn't speak the truth herself, but she made sure it would survive long enough for someone braver, or maybe just someone with less to lose, to speak it for her. Joan built 30 years of family loyalty on a lie. It took 11 letters and one afternoon to take all of it apart. Lies don't always survive the people who tell them. If you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew, I want to hear about it. Have you ever found out someone in your family was innocent all along? What did you do with that truth? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. Some truths sleep for decades. Others are buried forever. Our next story begins with a secret no one expected to survive.